Okay, welcome to all of you. I'm glad that you're here from all over the world, that you've joined our Fireside Fire Drill chat this June 19th, also known as Juneteenth. I'm just moving this out of the way. And it's also known as Freedom Day, in honor of the end of the Civil War and emancipation from slavery. You know, it marks the day that emancipation, the news of emancipation, actually reached those in Texas and the deepest parts of the former Confederacy, almost 2 years following the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, think about that as opposed to us with social media and phones and Instagram and all that. 2 years it took the news to reach those parts of the Western United States. And it's a profound reminder of the delay in justice for Black and brown people. You know, we in the United States are in a moment of revolution when an unprecedented number of people are realizing that the system is not working for us, not for us, the people, that it's been rigged to work for corporations and the very wealthy cisgender white people, and it needs to be fundamentally changed. This week, climate and environmental activists were invited to a meeting with leaders from the Movement for Black Lives to find out how we can best show up in this revolutionary moment and be strong allies in support of the demands of the Movement for Black Lives, which are so very much tied in with the demands for climate justice. I mean, think about it. Fossil fuel industry brings poisons deliberately into the air and water of communities of color and onto indigenous lands, and they call them sacrifice zones. And they do this because they believe that the people who live there lack the political power to fight back when they begin to die of cancer and heart disease and lung disease due to the pollution. And they figure that those who have the power won't care enough about poor Black and brown people to do anything about it. US meat and poultry packing plants and prisons and retirement homes where workers and staff are largely people of color are seeing COVID-19 infections raging out of control, yet they've been required to remain open with little or no help from the government, with government assistance or protective gear. Sacrifice zones. And right now in Montgomery, Alabama, I know this, I have friends there and they've told me, the Alabama hospitals, ICU beds and ventilators are maxed out and the coronavirus is spiking. And the other night, Black members of the city council voted that masks must be required in the city, and the white members of the city council voted no. Most patients are Black in those hospitals. Staff is crying for help, but it's not coming. Sacrifice zones. The mentality that creates sacrifice zones believes in a racial and gender hierarchy with white men at the top, white supremacy. As Black organizer Hop Hopkins has written, and I quote, "You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. And you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. And you can't have disposable people without racism," unquote. In other words, our fight for a sustainable future must also entail fighting for an end to white supremacy. So today, I want to affirm loud and clear that Fire Drill Fridays is committed to following the Black leadership of this movement and supporting the days of action, which are starting today and which we've been linking to across social media platforms, and we'll include links here in today's talk. We are also supporting the long-term demands of the Movement for Black Lives, which are: number one, defund the police; two, fund and invest in Black communities; and three, the resignation of Donald Trump. In the past couple of weeks, owing to the unprecedented, diverse, and prolonged uprisings across this country, we've gotten a taste of people power, bringing new consciousness and perhaps even structural change to police forces. Many of the participants are new to protest. And this is important because we need numbers not seen in our lifetimes, all the way between now and to the elections in November and beyond. Why beyond? Because we're going to have to force the new president to do what's right, what democracy demands, what humanity demands, and in the case of climate crisis, what science demands. And the changes we demand must be ones that change the policies and systems of power that favor the sacrifice zone mentality. It's that same mentality that stole land and resources from the original inhabitants of North America and enslaved people they kidnapped from Africa and called both people savages and not human in order to be able to call themselves men who built democracy. It's one mentality. The exploit, rape, and lay waste, the macho, never be seen in a mask or in a bunker, don't tell me what to do mentality. And it's got to end because it is killing us. Whether we are marching today carrying Black Lives Matter signs or Black Trans Lives Matter, or celebrating Pride or protesting an oil pipeline or actively supporting all of the above from the safety of our homes because of COVID-19, all of us, we're fighting the same enemy. And time is running out. And this isn't hyperbole. Scientists tell us we have 10 years left to cut our carbon emissions in half. Our calendars tell us we have about 21 weeks until the elections, what can save our democracy. And our hearts tell us things must change and we can't stop until they do. Today, we want to highlight the intersection of queer and trans liberation and climate justice, which is, after all, founded on the principle that we all deserve a planet where we can thrive and be safe, whoever we are. Queer and trans people have long been on the front lines of climate activism. You know, I remember in 2016 at Standing Rock during the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, going to a Two-Spirit camp. See, Two-Spirit is the Indigenous way to refer to queer and trans people. And I met brave queer and trans warriors who were standing up to a militarized police brutality. And I've studied about the great Lakota war leader, Crazy Horse, and learned that he always wanted a queer fighter with him when he went into battle. But just as capitalism sees a forest and thinks doors and flooring, it sees two spirits, and instead of seeing a gift, it sees a mistake. But we're working to change that story, right? We're working together. And before I introduce our two guests, it's time for our good news segment where we brighten your day with a bit of positive news. And this week, the US Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling in support of the rights of all LGBTQ plus people. The gay, lesbian, transsexual, transgender, queer people, regardless of how they identify, can't be discriminated against in the workplace because of their gender or sexual identity. Yes. You might be thinking, isn't that a basic right yet? Yeah, it is. But now it's finally being recognized by the US Supreme Court. Now I'm going to introduce you to two people who have experienced their share of intersectional hardships, who are fighting the good fight across sectors, and I'm so grateful that they're here with me. First of all, Indya Moore is a celebrated actor, writer, model, and social activist. Born and raised in the Bronx, Moore has appeared in such publications as Teen Vogue, GQ, and Vogue, as well as collaborations with such designers as Louis Vuitton and Calvin Klein. Moore was selected by Time magazine for their 2019 list of 100 most influential people list, and also made history as the first trans person to be on the cover of Elle magazine. Additionally, Moore has appeared on the Hollywood Reporter's 2019 Next Gen list, as well as the Forbes 30 Under 30. Moore currently stars in the groundbreaking, terrific Emmy-nominated FX series Pose, in which they star as Angel, a trans woman searching for love and navigating the world of the 1980s ball scene in New York City, ultimately finding strength in their found family. Welcome, Indya.
Hey,
Hi,
Jane, thank you so much. What a
thanks for being here.
brilliant intro overall. Thank you. Thank you for
And
having
now
me.
I'd like to introduce Billie Lee, a transgender woman, activist, and blogger, currently living in Los Angeles, born and raised in Indiana. Billie graduated from a broadcasting academy in Illinois, where she secured her degree in radio, TV, and film. Knowing she was ready for bigger things, Billie moved to California, where she began motivating and inspiring others as a lifestyle blogger and TV host. After Tinder introduced their new transgender feature, Billie has been a spokesperson and model for the trans movement. You may also recognize Billie from her features in BuzzFeed videos and the hit reality TV show Vanderpump Rules. Billie sits on the boards of Equality California, Flux, and recently the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. Welcome, Billie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate you both being here. And to get started, let's take a few minutes and just hear from each of you a little bit about yourselves, who you are, why we're all here together on this call today. Should we start with you, Indya?
Sure. I'm an actor. You gave a great introduction. I'm really flattered by it. I'm an activist. I'm in and out of referring to myself as an activist, but I'm here today with Jane to share a little bit of my perspective and a little bit of my experience, my perspective of the world and you know, my experience in it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We need to hear about that. How about you, Billie? Do you want to give us a little introduction of yourself?
Well, I've always had a passion for this planet and for the people on it, especially people who suffered. I suffered a great deal as a child, being born and raised in a very small town. And I love our planet and I love the people on it. And sadly, minorities, people of color are the ones that are suffering the most. And I feel like it's my duty as a white person to speak up. And, our ancestors did some horrible things. And I really do think it's our duty to speak up and fight and be with them. And trans people of color are the love of my lives. And I will do anything to speak and help them in any way possible. And same goes for this planet and the climate.
What does activism mean to you, Billie, in this incredibly historic moment, which is an intersection really of converging crises?
I think it's, people would say it's uncomfortable, but it's like getting used to that uncomfortable feeling and fighting for people that have to feel uncomfortable every single day. And for me as an activist, that is standing up and being loud and, being radical and making a statement to protect lives.
How about you, Indya? What does activism mean to you right now at this intersection of crises?
Well, the reason why I feel kind of cautious around the word activism is because I feel like it creates an occupation that other people who we need to be involved in social justice feel like they can't access. And so I like to put it in a way like everyone is an activist. When you see somebody that you love hurt, you stand up for them. When you see your friend being bullied in school and you try to break up the fight, that's activism, to me. And I think activism on a political scale is just the same thing. You know, it's pushing back against forces of harm to protect people who are vulnerable and marginalized by harm. So like, that's what activism is to me. It's a practice that, it's a practice of human nature that we all do each and every day in our lives. And I think what it means to me now today is expanding that, that activism that we action in our lives for the individuals that we love and our families and our close circles. We have to expand that empathetics. We have to expand our empathetic capacity to include marginalized people and people who are suffering the most in this country, just because of the color of their skin, who they love, or how they love, or how they experience their own gender, you know, their own humanity. So I think, yeah, like I think activism is, I think putting it like that kind of makes it feel more accessible to more people. So it's not like an occupation, like these are activists, these are not. Like, no, everyone already is an activist. And I think we should expand the work that we're already doing in our personal lives to include people who are suffering all over the world, because it takes a joint effort to push back against power that causes harm.
And Billie, when we spoke last week about the intersections of pride and the LGBTQ community, you said something that really struck me. You said that our enemies are all the same. Can you tell us more about that and the intersectionality of movements as you see them?
Yeah, well, you know, the really white cis men, the wealthy white men, they don't believe in climate change, and they also don't believe in trans rights, and they don't believe that Black people that they matter. And I think that we're fighting the same enemy. And I think it's really important that we have this conversation, especially during the Black Lives Movement and Pride, that, you know, in coming together and building this foundation of this movement, because we really are, you know, dealing with the same people and the same enemy.
Yeah. I want to, having watched, because I'm still social distancing, being old and kind of vulnerable in terms of my immune system, I haven't joined any protests yet. It's killing me. But, you know, you said white men are, but there were a lot of white men marching, holding up Black Lives Matter signs. So I just want to say, there are some really good white men, right?
Right.
I don't want to demonize them all. I'm grateful that they're starting to understand that we're all in this together. Indya, you've been an activist for quite a long time. When we spoke last week, you said you've never felt so hopeful. And tell us about that, about your journey with activism and what this particular moment in history means to you.
I just like to touch on your point about good white men and bad white men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only Black person in this space, so I just want to remind everyone how important it is to center my voice. Before I get to your question, I do not feel like it's helpful to characterize white men as good or bad, or as good or bad, or create these binaries, because I think, first of all, you know, humanity is a little more, is more complex than just good and bad. And also creating these binaries of good and bad, I think erases or minimizes the harm that well-intentioned white people cause by what they don't know or understand. So I just want to put that out there, because I think there are a lot of well-intentioned white men and white folks who constantly continue to perpetuate patriarchy and white supremacy in ways that they're not aware of. So I want to be very careful in assigning, you know, anybody as inherently good or inherently bad, because, you know, I think it's a little more complicated. And this is the perspective of a Black trans femme. And I hope it's respected and heard. What was your question again? Sorry.
Let me just say, I completely agree with what you've said. You know, I mean, I could have said a while back, I'm not racist. I worked a lot with the Black Panthers. I have a daughter whose parents were in the Black Panther Party. I'm not racist, but then I began to realize I don't understand enough about white privilege, and I don't understand enough about the history of racism. And so
Right.
I have to really kind of do a lot more work than I thought. But at least it's a start that there's so many white people marching with Black people. Do they have to do a lot of deep work on themselves? Yeah, I know this
100%.
personally.
Racism is a systemic, is a system just is a system of oppression just as much as patriarchy and just as much as you know, transphobia. So like an anti, you know, like, so I think I remember when Monroe Bergdorf said all white people are racist, and she was immediately her contract was terminated with L'Oreal. She was punished for making that statement. But what they didn't hear was her you know, like her point in mentioning that no, it's not about all white people don't like are inherently evil, bad, or are ill-intentioned. That's not what she was saying. In the same way that all men are sexist because they're men and because they benefit from patriarchy, is what her point was about. You know, all white folks are racist, particularly because of their that they don't have a choice but to benefit from white supremacy. But that's not, you know, I think that's a point to consider. But I think, yes, racism is a system that we all participate in, and it's just so hard to avoid. You know, so it's like, I think being anti-racist is not something that you decide one night, and you're no longer, you know, like you're cured, like you're not, like you're, you know, you no longer participate. Like the work of anti-racism is every day. You know, you have to constantly check your mind frame of thinking. You have to constantly check in with the people that you surround yourself with, the people that, you know, you employ or you funnel resources to. Like anti-racism work is systemic. It's not just personal, because racism is systemic and it's not personal. So, you know, it's the same with patriarchy. Like my partner, other men, like know that they are sexist, and that it's really important for them to know that they are inherently sexist because they're men, and that you know, their masculinity, the adoption of masculinity exists similarly to the adoption of whiteness as an identity, and so they function in very similar ways, in ways that can cause harm. We not see color, you know, that somebody just left the point from Vanessa Williams. I think that's a great point to consider. How, you know, white folks think that choosing not to see color is a way to eradicate racism, and that's simply untrue. You have to see color without being racist. You know, see color, love color, invite it into your homes, bring it into your employment spaces, populate, you know, and economize color, love color. But also know that your experiences as a white person to people of color will always be different, and that you have a responsibility and an accountability to marginalized people of color, particularly Black folks, because of your beneficiary from white supremacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but you guys are doing it, and I'm so grateful, and that's why I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Well, we're sure happy you're here. Let's talk about Pride and what Pride is all about, because June, you know, is Pride Month, and there's a lot of connections to this moment. I mean, Pride began at Stonewall, right, as a riot in the face of police brutality, and it was a moment of real power for what was then called the gay liberation fight. And people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and Latinx and Black trans people and drag queens and activists, they all played a central role and were essential in setting the stage for rights that queer people have today, including this week's incredible victory at the Supreme Court. So reflect on Pride and its meaning for our listeners. This is to both of you. You want to start, Billie?
Well, yeah, and I just wanted to touch base really fast when I mean like the same enemy, I'm talking like Donald Trump, the men that are in power. Because there are a lot of beautiful, amazing, including myself and my friends here, white allies that are out marching every single day. So I do agree with you. And everything you said, India, was perfectly said and beautiful. And I love you and respect you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, pride for me is, you know, being born and raised in a small town, I couldn't be proud of who I was. And my first march ever was in Los Angeles, and I went by myself. I was so scared. And there was nothing but love. And it was just such a powerful, overwhelming feeling. And it was my first sense of community. And I felt protected and safe with these people. And ever since then, I've just always been like, I love pride. I love like being involved and marching and being part of community. I think it's a beautiful thing. And, you know, with all the police brutality, we have to like understand that this is where pride started, and we're still having this conversation and still dealing with it. And I think all people that are, even if they're not part of the LGBTQ community, need to realize that we've been fighting for this for a really long time. And I think that they have to understand that this fight is for everyone. It's not just the LGBT community and just for pride.
India, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Billie. And I also relate, my first experience in community was also when I was my first time going to Pride. I wasn't supposed to go, but I went anyway. And it was really beautiful. I remember making a shirt. I was very young. I was a teen. I was going to high school. I remember, and like also, yeah, Pride was like this space that like children weren't like allowed to be a part of or to go. And there were so many implications in how, you know, queer and trans culture is, and experiences are like for mature or audiences only. And, you know, I think that justifies so much of the sexualization and things, but that was my first experience of Pride, and it was really beautiful. I think Pride is really important, and I'm so glad that we have it because it reminds us, the people who carry Pride as Black and trans folks and queer folks and brown folks. It reminds us to constantly, or for me, it reminds me to always that my pride, my sense of pride is self-preservation, and it's a resistance to systems that make me want to feel less than human for who I am. And so I think that's why pride is important, and that's what it means to me. Billie, what you mentioned about we all having the same enemy, I literally was having that conversation with Jane the other day about how the same people who are anti-Black and doing the work of white supremacy are also doing the work of destroying the earth. And that, you know, like are pushing back. And so like, we had a really beautiful conversation with Jane about how Black liberation and by POC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, the liberation of by POC literally can influence the way that we treat the earth, because the way that we treat other human beings and other forms of life are reflective of the way that we feel about nature and the planet, because we're a part of the planet.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you both something. I'll start with you, India. What do you think, what role do you think the leadership of queer women of color and non-binary folks is playing in tone and quality of this moment? The leadership of the movement for Black Lives Matter, queer women of color and non-binary. How do you think that has affected how this moment is playing out?
I think that reflects to a poem that I just posted on Instagram about the ways that I feel like men can't be trusted in leadership because their imaginations don't include experiences that surpass their own. And so, particularly in Black liberation, this is what I feel and believe, that has been, you know, Black liberation has been led by queer women. Mostly I'm seeing now a lot, and always has really, but queer women have seldom been centered. You know, we see the Malcolm X's and we see the Martin Luthers, but, you know, we don't see Black women, or especially Black women who are queer, centered and idolized in the same ways that we see Malcolm and Martin. And so I think the transformation of Black liberation, we see so many trans and queer folks so much more comfortable being involved. And I think it's because of the leadership, being able to occupy multiple marginalized experiences expands on your ability to empathize without being taught how. And so I think that's what's so special and brilliant. And I think that all men, and particularly Black men who have done the work of unlearning sexism and patriarchy, will agree that Black women and femmes should be leading Black liberation. And I think that those are the men that get behind and support them and exercise their power in the most effective way to support those women and us, all of us.
That's great, Indya. Thanks. Billie, do you want to add anything?
Well, you know, just like you were saying about the two-spirit and how they would want to go in with a two-spirited person. And I believe that. I believe that the trans women, especially trans women of color, and Black queer women, I believe, and it's so powerful to see them lead. And it goes all the way back to being two-spirit. I really do feel that it's important for them to be the leader and in the front of the line so people can see that and it can represent the people that are the most vulnerable. So and everything Indya said, I agree.
Great. Billie, I know you're from a small town in Indiana that not many people have heard of. If you wouldn't mind sharing, how did your childhood and upbringing shape who you are today? How did it lead to your activism?
Well, my town is very small and all white. I grew up with racist family and parents at the time. My hometown is known as one of the largest KKK gatherings. And I was treated very differently than everyone around me because I was queer, because I was feminine, because I was trans. And I would want to I'd seek people that were different than me. And I couldn't wait to befriend a person of color because everyone around me was white. And when I befriended a person of color, as an early teen, I saw how they treated my friends of color. And it was not that I could ever, you know, understand what a Black person goes through, especially in America, but what I felt, the discrimination that I felt as a child and how they would be with my friends of color, it made me want to instantly protect them and love them. And it built this like deep love for people of color and anyone that's a minority. And, you know, I had to unlearn things as a white person. My parents raised me, they were, you know, dropped out of high school. They were very uneducated and poor, and they were scared of people of color, and they put that fear in me, and I had to unlearn it. I did so much research and reading books, and my first girlfriend ever of color, Dee Dee, who I love and adore, like I would hang out with her mom and her grandma, and I would learn their culture, and I was just so amazed, and I'm just so in love. And I think it's important for all white people to like step outside of your comfort zone and learn and grow and listen. And I would just be a sponge, and I listened, and you know, it's challenging. I recently went back home to Indiana, and the younger generation, my niece and them, because they're on TikTok and they have YouTube and Instagram, they are so Black Lives Matter and so open. But I have my aunts and grandparents who are like, all lives matter. And I had to like explain to them. And, you know, it's challenging, but I definitely had to unlearn. And I even did this thing in my head where like, anytime I saw a person of color, I would just love them. I would send love energy to them. And I would just be amazed at their beauty. And that helped me like transform my fear to love, which is a miracle. So yeah, it's something I always encourage people is to try to just love and not use fear.
I'm just very moved. Thank you, Billie, for the work that you've done. Would that everyone would do that work. Indya, when we talked a few days ago, you know, you really helped me so much to understand uh, about freedom for someone who is trans and non-binary. And you talked about freeing yourself from the poisons of patriarchy. And you said, and this is a quote, you shouldn't have to be anything just to be. You said that's the core of freedom. Can you tell us what freedom means to you and what that journey has been like?
Freedom to me means that my identity isn't a welcome mat for oppression and violence. That's what freedom means to me. It means that the color of my skin or the way that I love or who I choose to love or how I experience my own humanity, that there is no way that would ever be a welcome mat for violence. That's what it means to be free to me. And I think I also think about Nina Simone every time, because I remember her interview and they asked her, what is freedom to you? And she said, freedom to me is no fear. And that really resonated with me because all my life I lived in fear of destruction. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. My mom was a practicing Jehovah's Witness who is so passionate about making sure that her family was able to find spiritual liberation. And I have had a well-intentioned Christian mother and a well-intentioned Christianic father. And I remember I always was fond of I knew at a very young age that I thought that I was attracted to men. And so going to church without, even disclosing to my parents until 13, going to church, going to the Kingdom Hall is what we call what it's called. My mom, I had a conversation with her. She told me every time I go to the meetings, every time I went to the Kingdom Hall, I felt a sense of peace and a sense of calm and safety. And I always wanted that from my mother. She deserves that. That spiritual grounding. But I told her, I said, my experience differed. I always felt unsafe and afraid and anxious and stressed at a very young age. I was constantly aroused with stress and anxiety and fear, just going to the meetings because they preached semi-annually, or I don't even know, but it was the frequency, but it was very frequent that we would go onto the subject of that homosexuals and transvestites would be destroyed. And so I lived a lot of my life with feeling like I was gonna, I had an impending spiritual demise. And so, it was a lot to feel like I was spiritually forbidden or uneligible to access God, and so I lived with a lot of that, and that was really tough. But when I came to terms with my identity at 13, I decided I wasn't gonna kind of hide anymore because I just felt too much anxiety about my parents not knowing, and I really wanted them to know. They found out without me telling them, and it was a really interesting journey. I ended up in foster care because it was tough throughout my life. I didn't really talk about that too much, but I was disciplined for my transness and my queerness was misunderstood as bad behavior, which is informed by sinfulness, this ideology of sinful identities. And so because sin is conceptualized spiritually as bad behavior, basically, I was punished, I was punished for the way that I expressed myself constantly. And a lot of that punishment was physical violence. And so I continued on to my journey, coming into my transness, fitting. I started hormonal replacement therapy. And, I was picked on a lot through my process. People were clocking me all the time and spooking me and or Indya, whatever they called me, tranny and faggot and all those things that we hear queer people called and stuff. And I was very binary in my womanness, and I was very much I'm a woman, period. That's it. I'm not trans. I ain't none of this stuff. I am a woman. That's it. And so much of my identity was informed by the women around me, by other trans folks. A lot of trans people told me that I would never be a woman if I didn't have breasts. A lot of trans folks told me I would never be a woman if I had a penis. So much of my experience was informed in my understanding of what's the right way to be a woman, right? So much of that was informed by a lot of people around me. And so I approximated myself with these constructs, and I thought that they would liberate me from the anti-trans pain that I was experiencing. I thought cis heteronormativity would liberate me from transphobia, from queerphobia, from being spooked all the time and experiencing that violence. And so I wanted to not experience that. I didn't want my life to be on the line. I don't want to experience violence. And so I approximated myself just as much as possible to cis heteronormativity and heteronormative conforming. And so I eventually ended up experiencing shame in my romantic relationships with the men that I was with. They were very embarrassed to introduce me to people, to their families. I was ostracized within my romantic relationships, as well as other parts of it from my family. I was ostracized in every way that I could possibly be ostracized by people who were supposed to love me. And it was very lonely. It was very lonely, a very lonely experience. And eventually that ostracization and that silencing and that invisibilizing me became violent. It became abuse. It became me, being harmed. This is my experience. It's dark, it's sad and all that, but this is what happened. This is what a lot of trans people's experiences is. So I was beaten, a lot of women's experiences. I was strangled because he thought that I stole something. I remember he kicked me out one day because he thought that when we were walking outside, I was looking at a woman. I'm not attracted to femmes or women, but in that way, but just the fact that I couldn't even be because that would mean that I wasn't a woman, to my partner at the time. And that to him, triggered him to harm me because he couldn't fathom and deal with being in a relationship with someone who was trans.
Yeah.
But he
India,
was. Sorry.
India, you are something that you went through this and survived and have become the person you are. What would you tell your 13-year-old self from the vantage point?
I wouldn't tell my 13-year-old self anything. I would tell the people around me who were responsible for loving me and keeping me safe. I would speak to them. I did everything I was supposed to do right. I survived and I'm here, and I wouldn't tell myself anything because it's not me. the issues weren't going to be solved through me. But if there was something I could say to the people that around me who were responsible of taking care of me, I would just repeat the same things that I said when I was 13.
Yeah, that's a
Because
great
I
answer.
said it. But I wanted to finish my story because it's my journey and how I finish answering your question. I know it's long. I'm going to try to shorten it. But I'm going to try to be really quickly. The violence that I experienced in my relationships with men that I was with because of their transphobia helped me to realize that cis heteronormativity wasn't going to liberate me, right? Cis heteronormativity wasn't going to liberate me. And I had a very similar experience with whiteness. I thought my proximity to whiteness would liberate me. My mother is a very light-skinned Puerto Rican woman, very close to Billie and yours complexion. And my dad is a dark-skinned Black Dominican man. And so, you know, I grew up experiencing violence from the people who are closest to me, to Black and brown people in school, in my neighborhood, et cetera. And so I started to self-loathe and to feel this internalized hatred for myself, my features, my Blackness, my dad, like the men in my life, the color of my skin. And I thought this because the people who were my first oppressors were the people in my community because I'm trans. So when I went to school, my teachers, who were all white, except Miss Hill, she was a Black woman, and I'm so grateful for Miss Hill. Thinking about her today. She was a teacher to a special education class. She taught, kids with disabilities. I love her so much. But anyways, my white teachers and Miss Hill, but mostly my white teachers, were very intentional about making space for me and my queerness and my transness, and for me to have safety at school, if not anywhere else. And so that all of those dynamics created this system inside of me where I thought that whiteness was comfort, whiteness was safety, whiteness was maternity, and that Blackness was not. Blackness was danger and violence. And so much of just the way the system exists as, the way that it operates as, the fact that there are more white teachers in school, and that we don't have like a mix, you know what I mean? Like in our schools, people like that's, you know, we need to have comfort from people who also look like us, you know? And so, you know, there's just so much of the ways that we harm each other has been informed by colonialism and is a part of the colonial project to keep Black people in a state of always crawling out of, in a state of always crawling. And so, you know, I felt so much of that in my being trans because of the colonial informed transphobia and the colonial informed queerphobia. And so I thought that whiteness would liberate me. I thought my proximity to whiteness would liberate me. I thought that that would free me. And what I learned was that it imprisoned me even more. And it put me farther, it took me farther away from myself, and from my family, from my community, and it dampened and put out the light and the fire that I had inside of me to exist in solidarity with my families and people. So it's like there were so many different things that I found myself liberating myself from as a Black person, as a trans person who was cis assumed and thought that cis heteronormativity would liberate me from violence. And, you know, I was so harmful to trans people who were not cis assumed. I didn't want to be around trans people who didn't look cis because I thought that they were going to invite violence into my life because they were spookable. And if they were next to me, then I would be spooked as well. And so like, there's so much that I had to unlearn and so much I had to be accountable to. And all of these experiences, you know, coming out of abuse coming out of the abusive situations that I did with my partner led me to really reconsider and think about why I hated my trans identity so much. And so there was so much self-hatred that I had to unlearn. And like, I started to question things, and my questions brought me to information. And some of the information that I learned was that colonialism informed binaries as well, which is something that I didn't know. You know, so I was just shocked. And, you know, one day I remember feeling comfortable not shaving my body. And I was thinking about how comfortable I actually felt about my body in ways that I didn't feel allowed to, because that would delegitimize my identity as a trans person. And so there were choices that I made to conform to what I thought would liberate me in this world. And so, you know, I met somebody who was non-binary, and I learned so much. And just the violence that I saw from trans people onto non-binary people, gender non-conforming people, trans people who were cis-assumed, seeing that happen as well. Seeing how, you know, women also are creating these rules and binaries for femmes to follow, and women and femmes to follow. Like, there's so many rules and binaries that I realized that no one completely follows, and anyone who doesn't experiences some form of violence because of it. So I said, you know what? I'm doing away with the whole binary. I'm done. I'm just throwing it away. And that's where I found my freedom, personally.
That's your freedom. Yeah. I'm so grateful, Indya, that you are someone who is strong enough to be able to step back from what you've been through and articulate it the way you do, because I think that your voice and your story can help so many people. And a lot of people are really, really grateful to you. You've taught all of us a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me have that space to talk about those experiences.
Absolutely.
That's what I came here for.
That's what you came here for. And you've taught me a lot in a short amount of time. And Billie, why do you feel it's important that LGBTQIA activists get involved in the fight for climate and vice versa?
First of all, Indya, I love you so much, and I'm so sorry that you went through that. And I've been crying like crazy over here, but the shame runs so deep, and with the trans issues and the trans experience. So I feel you, and I say namaste, because the light and teacher in me recognizes and honors the light and teacher in you. I think that when it comes to the LGBT community and the climate impact, what we're going to deal with, if it's COVID-19 or the sea rising, the most vulnerable people are going to suffer, and that is going to be people of color and LGBTQ people. And I just, you know, even COVID-19, I mean, we have our health rights being taken away by the president, Donald Trump. And if one of my sisters or myself or someone is sick, we can't get health coverage. Like, it affects us so deeply. And that's just, you know, with climate, it really does impact the most vulnerable, and people of color and LGBTQ people are the most vulnerable.
Can I just say really quickly, thank you, Billie, for mentioning that, because there was something I wanted to bring up. I thumbtacked it, but then I lost it. Yes, we are now free to work and not be fired for being trans and queer, and this is brilliant. But we are also, I think capitalism is a very interesting space where, like, it functions and exists for everybody, because everyone should be able to be machines and work constantly, right? Because it doesn't really matter what body it is. So I think this is a little bit of the perspective that can be coming from you know, trans bodies also being machines for capitalism as well. Because at the end of the day, the generation of money is the generation of money, and it shouldn't matter who's doing that work. Now, the reason why I feel like that is because we are still vulnerable to medical discrimination and healthcare. We're still vulnerable in shelter as well. So like, you know, there are other places that we're really vulnerable in that we need to not be vulnerable in order for us to have futures that haven't been addressed. And so that's what brings me to like this thing where I'm like, okay, you guys don't actually care about our freedoms. You just care about the generation of capitalism. And that you want to make sure that everybody is participating in that no matter what. So like now when we're sick and we're like, we can't work, you know, we might get punished, you know, like we might be punished for, and then lose our jobs because we fell ill, we don't have help, you know, so like there's so many implications, lose our jobs, we don't have shelter, no one can guarantee a shelter, you know, if we don't have a place to stay because they don't have to, because we're trans and queer. So, you know, like it's also really important for the laws to be defined across the board for the full liberation of trans people as well.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything, Billie, to the issue of climate? I think if I'm not sure this is true, but I think that I have read that a large percentage of homeless, especially homeless youth, are queer and trans. And of course, homeless people are way vulnerable to climate crises. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
queer and trans people and particularly Black and brown people of color are particularly vulnerable to the climate crises. I think anyone who doesn't have the economic means to just up and run or depend on infrastructure is vulnerable to climate change. And I think about the Indigenous people, I think about the people in Michigan right now in Flint who still don't have clean water, and how, you know, all these things intersect. I think the climate crisis is a direct oppression of Indigenous people. You know, the white men and women are coming out and doing whatever they please to the earth and to the lands. And I think so much of this is implicit. It's connected to this ideology of manifest destiny. I heard somebody say that these things are all connected. That the same mentality that's causing like racism is the same mentality that's causing climate change. Like, yes, that's true. That mentality is so much linked into this ideology of manifest destiny. This idea that white folks felt like, colonial white folks felt like, this is mine, this is my destiny, and it's gonna manifest no matter what, because I'm gonna make sure that it does. And so like, it's just interesting how everyone is pulling out this like spiritual philosophical idea of like manifesting a destiny to justify the oppression of people. And Jane, you put it so brilliantly. I didn't know about any of these quotes or any of these people who said that, even though I can assume that, you know, we've already assumed that this is their mentality. But you mentioned so clearly how like somebody said they need like disposable people in order to ravage the earth and create capitalism. That's literally, yeah. So, you know, I think I post about it. I said it on Twitter. I think the focus on BIPOC liberation, the focus on Black liberation, which benefits BIPOC. I think focusing on Black liberation and creating those intersections in climate change. I mean, the intersections of climate change already exist in there, but I think there's such a strong fight, and there's I think there's so much potential for an even larger uprising for all the ways in which social injustice exists are intersected with Black liberation, because it all is connected. Capitalism began, the expansion of capitalism that ravaged the earth began with the transportation, the stealing of the stealing of and transportation of Black bodies from Africa. So that's where it began, and that's where I believe it will end.
And genocide of Native Americans, yes.
And the genocide of Native Americans, yes, that's.
We've come to the end of our time. I just want to thank you both so much for coming on Fire Drill Friday with me. I think it's been very, very important to have you here. I hope that our audience has learned a lot. I certainly have. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who have joined from home. And please, please don't be silent right now. We show up in these coming days and weeks and months with the movement for Black and trans lives. This is a revolutionary time for all of us. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that call this week between leaders of the movement for Black lives and the climate community. And I just want to quote something that Maurice Mitchell said. He's a visionary leader with Movement for Black Lives. He quoted Lila Watson, who's an Australian Aboriginal artist and activist, who said, quote, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because you realize your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together," unquote. I feel so strongly that my liberation is bound up with you, Billie, and you, Indya, and the people that you represent. I feel it deeper than I ever have, and I'm so grateful to you. We must all work together, and Fire Drill Fridays is honored to stand in solidarity with the movement for Black lives and with all oppressed and marginalized people to stand and fight together until we win, and we're going to win. And please make sure to sign up at, well, it's that thing that goes at the beginning, https://map.619.com, map.619.com, to find events near you and to get involved. Fire Drill Fridays and Greenpeace are launching a massive electoral organizing program. Tens of thousands of people are involved to ensure that we elect climate champions up and down the ballot, and we need your help. We're building a very large volunteer voter contact teams. This includes teams for texting, teams for calling, teams for outreach to the Latinx community, for example, and more. And all of this can be done from the comfort of your own home. So please head to firedrillfridays.com/volunteer and sign up so our organizers can reach out to you and plug you in. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks again to Billie and Indya. Stay safe, stay healthy. Take good care of each other. I'll see you next time.
And for everyone here really quickly, make sure you advocate for reparations. Please, reparations are really important for Black folks. Reparations. Thank you, Jane, so much for creating this space for Billie and I.